Little Ice Age. When Little Ice Age occurred, why, how it's affected our Earth, climate, how it's affected human history in the last 500 years. Let's talk about that. Little Ice Age. It's not technically the ice age that occurred on our planet, but it's the cooling event. It was just following the medieval warming period. You're all familiar with the times, 9th, 10th, 11th century, medieval warming period, when a lot of historical events happened around the Europe, when large amount of people start moving because there was a warming in the climate. Places where before people couldn't grow crops, people start growing grapes in the places as far north as England, which since haven't been as warm even now. We're all familiar with the times when Vikings start moving around the Europe. They occupied Greenland, they even traveled as far as North America and landed in Norfolk there. It was the global warming event that scientists now can trace all around the planet, as far as in Antarctica, in the places like New Zealand, Australia, South America, North America, and Eurasia. It's interesting that this event was attributed to be a globally uniform event, so it's happened almost in the same time globally, when Little Ice Age, which was following that event, vary from place to place. We can't say it was a global event, we're suggesting it was rather a regional climate event. From historical documentation, events, memoirs, we know there was about 3 major times when the cooling hit the northern hemisphere, about 1650, 1770, and 1850 the last time. It was a general cooling in whole north hemisphere, including North America. Already as back in the 13th century, people start noticing the localized growth ice and increasing snow cover, which stay longer than before. Some people start losing crops, some famine, and global disease like a Black Death start affecting population. People start moving from the places where they established the settlements in places like Greenland, Iceland. People start looking for more warmer places to live. The first minimum temperature that been recorded about 1650 all around the northern hemisphere. We know that this period ended about beginning of 20th century. That time in North America, the glaciers reported to be about 100 meters lower down the valley in the position in the late 18th century than in the late 20th century. Even in the Central Americas, cultures like Maya and Aztec, they recorded a colder and dry periods. Scientists collecting the sediments from the bottom of the ocean can see the increase of sediment flux during the cooling events from the melting of icebergs that can transfer more material farther down. People recording and finding that there was a cooling event about that time in different places. The sediments from the lakes as well in Africa and Australia showing the cooler periods. Thus, in Africa, people reported peaks of the mountains covered with the snow that they didn't see before and we don't see now. In South Africa, the sediments for the lakes showing that cooling event was peaked about 15th and 18th century. Same in Antarctica, the cores which we examine on a different composition. The Little Ice Age showed 1.5 degree cooler temperatures than we observed during the last 150 years. In Australia, some scientists suggested the coldest period was peaked in 17th century. However, there's a little confusing data about that, because Australia and Pacific was affected differently due to the ocean and their position on the globe. All around Pacific Islands, we find evidence of drier and cooler period during the Little Ice Age. So let's talk about in the culture what evidence apart from the data we have. First of all, it was reflected in literature, in the arts like painting, when people reporting unusually cold winters all around the Europe, or very cold summers when the crops couldn't even grow. Thus many rivers that before were never been frozen, start freeze during the winters, and the people like to skating and developed all different type of sports on the ice at that time. For example, River Thames had a lot of fairs on the ice happening in 16th centuries and the 17th century, lasted till mid-19th century. Places like Greenland and Iceland was affected by that cooling period. The settlements that stay there, they had to be abandoned, or people were just dying there from reduced livestock, crops, failures, and famine. At that time, Greenland started being cut off by the ice, starting from 15th century till as far as 1720s. As a bad effect of all this cooling event, hunger, disease, poverty, violence start growing all around the Europe. You know that this period from famous painters as a Peter Brugger, painting the winters and a lot of people outside. We know the literature involving hunger periods of that time, like Dickens, French writer describing the poverty, sparse money, and constant cold all around Europe. The Little Ice Age affected the cultural people in many ways. During that time, the witch hunting became very popular around whole Europe like never before. People start blaming somebody for the cooling climate, hunger and not enough food. As a result, all this anger, hunger, poverty resulted in finding people who were responsible for that, such as the imaginary witch or other cultures or other nations. Other people start striving and trying to find new ways to live, new places to live. And we know there's a North America exploration thrive at that time and colonization of more tropical and warmer countries all around the world. However, as I said, this Little Ice Age wasn't uniformly occurring globally. So there's still some places where we speculate whether a Little Ice Age or not. There are places when it's occurred differently from Northern Hemisphere, and science literature is filled with suggestions and theories, what affected it, how there was a response Northern versus Southern Hemisphere, how the ocean played a role in it, and volcanic eruptions. Generally, from possible causes, people of course listing the orbital cycles, Milankovitch cycles, suggesting the global Arctic cooling happening that time, eventually leading to the full ice age. Another good evidence we have about the solar activity, that the sunspots activity was very quiet at that time. As back as 1645 till 1715, we have very low solar activity, known as a Maunder minimum. And that time, actually when the significant cooling happened in the Northern Hemisphere. However, with the solar activity, there's a very unknown yet connection with this and effect on the climate. So there's a lot of speculation about that. The volcanic activity can cause the cooling of the climate for the next year or several years due to amount of the ashes that emitted into the atmosphere and that goes higher into the stratosphere and circulate globally for some time before it settles down. A lot of sulfur coming into the stratosphere. When it's formed, sulfur dioxide gas, and these particles as well reflect sun radiation and sun beams, causing the cooling of the Earth's surface. That time, it is interesting that Little Ice Age coincides with volcanic eruption around the world. It wasn't just volcanic eruption with occurring now as well around the world, it was the major global huge eruptions, gigantic eruptions, that occur one after another. Those eruptions which were heard on the different continents in the same time, and the ashes from volcanic eruption, for example in Indonesia, was observed for many days in the places like New York. A lot of volcanic eruption happened in Indonesia, Philippines, South America, Papua New Guinea. For example, we have eruption in 1580, followed by 1600, 1641, Philippines, Papua New Guinea 1660, Iceland 1783, and the famous Tambora eruption in Indonesia 1815. There was so much ash in the atmosphere after the Tambora eruption for fallen year that it was known as the year without a summer. The frost and the snow were reported in June and July in the places like North America and Northern Europe. All these events caused not just cooling of the atmosphere temporarily, it's contributed to the global cooling event and the human fear. Some people speculate that changes in the human population and the way they start moving around the planet, the burst of industrialization, cutting down the trees, contributed to climate change. But however, there's no direct evidence. We know that 17th, 18th, 19th century was marked by deforestation all around Europe, North America, and the new colonized areas all around the world. However, there's no direct evidence suggesting that this effect caused the Little Ice Age. Some scientists suggested that the Little Ice Age was just the natural variation in the climate change after the warming period, which again come back to these days. However, again, we don't have very solid evidence about it. Little Ice Age time in glaciology, climatology, one of the most speculative period. We have so many evidence that it's happened. We had places, villages that be covered by the ice in Europe. We know the extent of the glaciers in places like New Zealand, North America, South America. We have records from the bottom of the ocean, from Antarctica. We have all these eruptions happened. The ashen deposits from which we can see, date, and estimate the effect on the global climate. However, the Little Ice Age is famous to be one of the most questionable on all other glacier events on our planet, because it's not as synchronized as any other climate event we experienced so far.